Hello everyone. Thank you all for watching the video and leaving meaningful comments. Wishing everyone good health and happiness. Early in the morning, before the first rays of sunlight could weave through the treetops, I was already awake. The fresh and cool mountain air filled me with an unusual sense of excitement. I put on an old but warm cloth jacket and wrapped a green scarf around my neck to keep warm. My bare feet gently stepped onto the small dirt path leading into the forest, where lush green foliage awaited me. The forest in the early morning was truly tranquil, with only the chirping of birds and the rustling of leaves in the breeze breaking the silence. I stopped by a large bush where dark green dong leaves grew abundantly. My hands skillfully began picking each leaf, carefully selecting the large, even ones without tears. Each time I gathered a bundle of leaves, I tied them tightly to ensure they wouldn't get damaged during transport. As sunlight began to pierce through the leaves, casting soft golden beams on my face, beads of sweat formed on my forehead. Yet, I didn't feel tired. With bundles of dong leaves neatly stacked on my slender shoulders, I walked out of the forest with a small sense of joy in my heart. When I reached the market, I laid out the bundles of dong leaves in front of me. The lively sounds of buyers and sellers made the marketplace more bustling than ever. Before long, all my bundles were sold. People bought them to prepare for wrapping bon chung for the upcoming festival. Looking at the small notes in my hand, I felt happy that my hard work had paid off. On my way home, I stopped by a small roadside shop. The store sold all kinds of household items, bowls, chopsticks, pots, and other small essentials. I picked out a few new bowls and a pair of bamboo chopsticks to replace the old chipped ones at home. The shopkeeper cheerfully wrapped up my purchases while I couldn't hide my joy at the thought of family meals with these brand new items. Walking along the familiar path back home, my heart felt light and full of hope. The last rays of morning sunlight shone on the red dirt road, making everything unusually warm and vibrant. At that moment, my heart was filled with simple happiness, a meaningful day's work and thoughtful preparations for everyday life ahead. On the way home, I felt the tranquility of the late afternoon. Soft golden rays of sunlight filtered through the treetops, casting interwoven patches of light and shadow on the ground. I walked slowly, carrying the items I had just bought from the store, my mind wandering to the simple dinner awaiting me. But then, an unfamiliar feeling suddenly made me turn around. From afar, I saw Mr. Pao appear, his short and sturdy figure dressed in traditional black attire. He entered a roadside flower shop where vibrant bouquets were displayed under the twilight glow. I watched as he carefully selected flowers, his aged hands gently holding each stem as if searching for something special. Finally, he chose a large bouquet with crimson red and pure white flowers before quickly leaving the shop. I resumed my walk home, trying to ignore his presence. Yet with every step I took, I could hear his footsteps following behind me. He kept a distance, saying nothing but looking at me with a hesitant gaze. When I reached home and was about to open the door, Mr. Pao suddenly approached. Standing in front of me, his hands trembling slightly, he held out the fresh bouquet he had just purchased. His eyes revealed both nervousness and determination. In a deep, hoarse voice, he said, "I'm sorry for what happened before. I know I was wrong and hope you can forgive me." I stood silently, unsure of how to react, as he continued, "I sincerely want you to be my wife. I'll take care of you for the rest of my life." His unexpected confession left me momentarily stunned. The bouquet in his hands was beautiful but heavy with emotions I could not reciprocate. I gently declined, "Thank you for this bouquet, but I cannot accept it. And I cannot be your wife." My voice was firm yet respectful. Mr. Pao stood there, his eyes reflecting sadness and disappointment etched across his aged face. He tried to say a few more words, but I simply bowed my head and quietly stepped into my house, leaving him standing alone at the door with the bouquet in hand. After a while, he turned and walked away, his steps slower and heavier than when he had arrived. Through a crack in the door, I watched his figure fade into the distance along the red dirt road under the evening light. A mix of guilt and relief stirred within me, guilt for turning him down but relief for having clarified everything. His sudden confession felt like a fleeting breeze disrupting my peaceful life, leaving a slight ripple but changing nothing. The sky gradually turned pale purple as dusk settled in. Sitting on my porch, I looked at the newly purchased items neatly placed on the table and reflected on what had just happened. My life would continue as it always had, simple and serene, with no room for complicated relationships or unrequited feelings. After I had just rejected Mr. Pow and stepped into my house, the air still felt heavy with the weight of his unexpected confession. But not long after, from the distance, James appeared. His tall and sturdy figure stood out against the red dirt road, his broad shoulders and sharp gaze giving me an unusual sense of reassurance. He walked closer and immediately noticed Mr. Pow lingering in front of my house, still holding the bouquet with a sorrowful expression. Without hesitation, James strode quickly toward him, his voice firm and resolute. "Mr. Pow, what are you doing here? She has already declined. Please leave." The decisiveness in his tone left Mr. Pow unable to say another word. He bowed his head and quietly turned away, leaving the bouquet behind in his hands. I watched his figure fade into the distance, feeling a mix of guilt but also relief that the situation had come to an end. James turned back to look at me, his gaze softening as he noticed my unease. "Are you okay?" he asked warmly. I nodded gently and smiled to reassure him. We sat down together on the porch, talking about everything that had happened. I told him about my morning in the forest gathering dong leaves and the joy of selling them all at the market. He listened attentively, his eyes reflecting genuine care. After a while, James suggested, "How about we do some work in your garden? I noticed your garden fence needs fixing." I agreed immediately, knowing he was always willing to help. Together we headed to the garden to select large bamboo stalks for building fence posts. James skillfully wielded a sharp blade to cut each long bamboo stalk with precision and strength. His powerful yet accurate swings left me quietly admiring him. One by one, the bamboo stalks were cut and neatly stacked nearby. James hoisted the longest stalk onto his shoulder, his robust figure standing out amidst the lush greenery of the garden. I followed behind him, carrying the necessary tools to prepare for setting up the posts. The sight of James with bamboo on his shoulder under the late afternoon sun filled me with a sense of peace and warmth. When we returned to the yard, we began working on constructing a new fence for the garden. James carefully measured each gap between the bamboo posts before hammering them firmly into the ground. I stood beside him, handing over smaller stakes to reinforce the fence further. Though simple, the work required both meticulousness and strength. We worked silently but comfortably together. The rhythmic sound of hammering mingled with birdsong in the garden, creating a serene and warm atmosphere. Watching James diligently labor for me filled my heart with gratitude and an indescribable sense of safety. As we neared completion, the sun began to set behind distant mountains. The last rays of sunlight illuminated James's suntanned face, making it even more radiant and captivating. Standing there watching him with a gentle smile on my lips, I realized more than ever that his presence had brought something truly special and precious into my simple life. When James was diligently hammering the last bamboo stakes to complete the fence around the garden, I retreated to the kitchen to start preparing dinner. The small wood-fired stove in the corner of my house had been a familiar companion for years, its flickering flames always bringing warmth amid the chill of the mountains. I lit the fire, placed a pot on the stove, and began cooking simple yet flavorful dishes. The aroma of freshly steamed rice and stir-fried vegetables filled the small house, blending with the soft crackling of burning wood. Outside, the rhythmic sound of hammering continued steadily. Occasionally, I glanced out the window and saw James working tirelessly under the fading sunlight. The bamboo stakes stood upright, forming a sturdy fence that would protect my little garden. He worked without pause, occasionally wiping sweat from his brow but maintaining a cheerful spirit. By the time I finished setting up dinner, James had completed his work in the garden. He walked into the house looking tired but content. I invited him to sit at the table, and together we enjoyed a meal after a long day of hard work. The atmosphere was initially relaxed as we chatted about plans for the garden and shared light-hearted stories from the day. But then I said something that changed everything. "James, I think you should visit me less often. I'm afraid people might gossip." My words came from a place of concern about societal judgment but unintentionally hurt him deeply. His face darkened, and his once gentle eyes grew cold. He set his chopsticks down, stood up, and said briefly, "If that's what you think, then I won't bother you anymore." Without another word, he turned and walked out of the house. I sat motionless at the table as our meal grew cold, my heart heavy with regret. I hadn't anticipated that my words would wound him so profoundly. The small house became eerily silent as I sat there alone. The wind outside whistled through gaps in the door, amplifying my sadness. Unable to bear the oppressive stillness, I went back to the kitchen and sat by the dying fire in the stove. The flickering flames illuminated my sorrowful face as their red glow danced in the shadows, as if trying to console me. I stared into the fire and thought about James, the man who had spent an entire afternoon helping me build a fence but left in anger because of my thoughtless remark. His image lingered vividly in my mind, his tall figure with broad shoulders full of strength, his gentle gaze whenever he looked at me, and his unwavering dedication to even the smallest tasks he undertook for me. Memories of our shared moments played like a slow-motion film in my head, deepening my sense of remorse. Night had fully fallen outside, enveloping both the garden and my small home in darkness. The only light now came from the dwindling flames in the stove. As I gazed out into the endless night, I silently hoped that tomorrow would bring an opportunity to mend my mistake and ease the sadness between James and me.